That was a fun event. Just confirming a couple of things here. It looks like we are live. So guys, I am so happy. I've been really looking forward to doing this live stream video with John Lee Dumas, who has definitely captured my heart, has had it for 6 years since we spent time together at Social Media Marketing World, and had a really great connection. We've been supporting each other's businesses and growth, but I have to say that I have really had so much fun watching your career, John. For those of you living under a rock that don't know John's story, he was on the commute, right, stuck in traffic, and he got this idea to run a 7-day-a-week podcast now known as Entrepreneur on Fire. Years later, to more than 2,000 episodes. Holy smokes, John. How does that feel 2,000 episodes later? Like, does the passion still, is it still there? Are you loving it? Does it feel like you're ready for the next thing? I have to ask.
Honestly, it feels like it grows on itself. I mean, I am just an extrovert and I love having conversations with people. I love getting energy from people. And it's really funny to kind of just really emphasize this point is I interview 8 individuals in one day. I do what I call batching, back to back to back. So I do 8 interviews in one day. And by the time I get to number 6 or 7, I let my guests know that, hey, this is interview 6 or 7 of 8 today. And they're like, oh man, I'm probably getting you at like a tired point. I'm like, the exact opposite. I'm like a vampire. I've been sucking off the energy of my previous guests. I'm getting better and better. My 8th interview of the day is my best interview because that's, my zone of fire. That's where I absolutely excel. And that's not for everybody, but I think it is a great takeaway is what is something that you just love and excel at to do that thing. For me, having a conversation with you, Amber, right now, I prefer doing this to basically anything else I could be doing in my business right now. So I get to do this so often and I love it. 2,200 episodes, that ain't no thing.
Oh, I love that. I was just talking to somebody today that she was asking me, so how are you doing? And I said, well, I'm maxed out and I love it. Like when I am not maxing myself out and challenging myself to new levels, like I get bored. I kind of start to spiral a little bit, or I doubt myself. It's like, I don't like that, Amber. So I come most alive when I'm like pushing it down to the wire and challenging myself and not overthinking, but just like getting stuff done. So I love that energy. Just before we went live, I was about to ask John a question and I thought, wait a minute, I should ask this so that everybody gets put him on the spot, right? So this idea of authorship is really on my mind right now, of course, as I am preparing for our 2-day live event, June 3rd and 4th, authoruplive.com, just 40 days left. I can't believe it. And so what I was getting ready to ask you, John, is there a big legacy book in your future? Have you started thinking about it or writing about it? Something that maybe expresses your methodology or your certain beliefs on something? I'm curious.
Not anytime in the near term future, but that legacy book, I think is definitely something that's, 30, 40, 50 years from now, I'm going to be sitting down and really looking forward to kind of starting to pen. There's definitely some books a lot before that are not my quote unquote legacy books that'll be coming. Absolutely. In fact, I was just conversating with Pat Flynn because his new book's coming out. So
in August.
I was helping him out with a blurb for that. And I'm really excited to see him just kind of like keep cranking these things out. For myself, I actually just recently launched our 3rd journal, the podcast journal, to go with our Freedom and Mastery journal. So I kind of have been doing these things. And thank you. Appreciate that. So there's definitely a legacy book in my very distant future. But before then, there's many more pieces of content, whether in the book form, the podcast form, and other types of great form like this.
Well, I had to ask because, when you're interviewing so many people, you get to suck up so much value and content. Like I cannot imagine what it's like existing in your mind with everything that with all of the people that you've connected with. So you have this successful podcast and you have really done so much in the past 5 years. But one of the things that you did was sort of leverage that podcast into speaking on some really significant stages. I thought we could touch for a minute on what was that journey for you? Was it easy to just kind of start off with a podcast and people started inviting you to stages and then it grew from there? Was it something that you really had to be strategic about and sort of invite yourself into events and get creative about it? What was that journey like for you?
It was more the latter. It was more having to be strategic, having to work really, really hard, and then just have some luck be involved with there as well. So to kind of give you the real quick rundown, I invested in Cliff Ravenscraft's podcast mastermind, which was $3,500 per year. So it was a big investment. This is before I launched my podcast. So I got to know Cliff really well. He was the podcast answer man. Fast forward 3 months to September of 2012, I launched my podcast. And then fast forward 3 months from that point, it's like the December timeframe. I had been in Cliff's mastermind for 6 months at this point. So now he had seen me every single week, knew how hard I was working, knew I was doing a daily podcast, which is super unique and different. And lo and behold, Cliff was running the podcast track for New Media Expo, which I'm not sure if you remember, Amber, but back in 2012, 2013, that was like the really only big social media conference there was. And so I was attending. I was going to go there and just be this attendee, like, yay, I can't wait to take it all in. December, I'm sitting down in the movie theater. One of the Lord of the Rings movies came out. I'm not sure which one. And I get an email from Cliff that says, John, we just had a podcast speaker drop out. It was a solo track. Can you fill in for him in 2 weeks at New Media Expo? And I remember looking at Kate and being like, I got to do this. I'm terrified. I'm going to be good on stage, but this is a huge opportunity. And the reason why Cliff asked me was because I had invested in myself, $3,500 for the masterminds. He got to know me. He saw that I was doing something unique, which is something we'll talk about next real quick, doing the daily podcast. And then I was just in the right place at the right time. I was 3 months into my podcast. So I had been doing it for a while, not a long time, but guess what? I had 90 episodes published because I had been doing it every single day for 3 months. And so I went to the conference, I presented, I was far from perfect. I was far from good, but I got it under my belt. I was able to hang out with the speakers, Pat Flynn, Amy Porterfield, Lewis Howes, Michael Hyatt, Michael Stelzner. I mean, I was on the level of the speakers.
Amazing.
Because I was a speaker instead of just being an attendee, which I would have been, 2 weeks prior, had the conference started earlier, and that guy actually showed up, who I actually still don't know who his name was, but thank you, whoever you are. That just set me off on the trajectory of like, oh, John was the speaker at New Media Expo. I was the only solo podcast speaker at that conference. There was a couple panels, but just one speaker. And so from that point forward, I just became the podcast guy for social media marketing world, for content marketing world, for all the big and small conferences around the world, from Australia to London to you name it. Like, I've been there to speak on podcasting, to just recently in Orlando for PodFest, where I was the opening keynote. Pat was a closing keynote. And then after the closing keynote, they did the John Lee Dumas roast, which, Amber, you would have.
Oh, I would have loved that.
You would have loved it, because I know you love comedy, because I still remember that great comedy show we went to together in San Diego. Yeah. You love comedy. I love comedy. Man, they ripped me to shreds, and it was hysterical.
Wow, what a journey. So a big takeaway, I think, is just showing up, right? So investing in yourself, doing the work. And I know that, especially for the people that I'm driving into this event, they're authors and they don't like the idea of self-promotion. They don't like putting themselves out there. They would be perfectly content writing in their office alone. They're usually introverts. And so it's really kind of hard to, you're an extrovert, right? So this is a little bit different of a crowd, but it is really important to still push yourself and get yourself out there, because that's where opportunity exists, right?
100%. And real quick, just before we move on, the vast, vast, vast majority of people in this world, especially entrepreneurs, identify themselves as an introvert. So if you're one of those identifying yourself as an introvert, that's great. You're in the vast majority, I promise you. And us extroverts, we're in the minority. And there's a lot of cons that come along with being an extrovert too. So don't worry about it.
That's great. Now, I'm going to ask you something that you're probably tired of answering, but I'm going to ask it anyway, because you're the podcast king, right? At least in my eyes. So
I actually got a crown over here. So
yeah, totally. I bet you do. Okay. So if the theme of Author Up Live is launches, and we're helping people launch, I have been preaching about the fact that getting interviewed on podcasts is definitely an avenue that you need to do to leverage that community, to build your credibility and authority. But as a podcast host, can you touch on a little bit, like, for people who are thinking about getting into podcasting and getting interviewed, what do they need to know as a podcast host? What do you appreciate when people approach you hoping to get on your show? Can you give them any insights on how to leverage podcasting for their launch?
Absolutely. So if you're going to launch a book and you're really excited about that book being launched, and is that what you really want to focus on, as a book launch?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
because we can talk about a podcast launch too, for sure. But with the book launch, with a podcast launch, it's all the same. Like it will so behoove yourself to be getting on other podcasts that are already established, that already have a audience that knows, likes, and trusts that host. So what are you going to do? You're going to go to iTunes and you're going to search by directory in the category that fits you best. You're going to sort by the top 200 podcasts. Then you're going to start going down those podcast lists, and you're going to see what podcasts are highly ranked, that have a lot of reviews, that have episodes that really make sense. You're going to go down that list and say, okay, these are like 50 or 100 of the 200 top podcasts in that category that really makes sense. Then you're going to click on that podcast. It's going to open up to the podcast page. And right below the logo, there's going to be a little link that says website. Click on that website button. It's going to take you to their website. On their website, there's a contact form. You're going to open up the contact form. And this sounds very step-by-step because it is.
I love it.
But then you refer back to the podcast page. And as you're composing that message to the individual, you're going to say, Amber, I know you have this podcast XYZ. It's super good. The last 10 episodes, you covered these topics. I especially loved this podcast and this podcast, which I listened to. It was very meaningful for this reason. I want to bring something different and unique because I have a different area of expertise that's still in the same theme of your podcast, but it's something you haven't talked about for a while. This is what I would love to share. And by the way, I'm an author. Potentially, maybe I'm even a podcast or whatever you fit in that category. But I'm an author. I know how important it is that once this goes live to share. So I will share with my entire audience when this episode goes live. My only request is that you publish this episode in this window and give them like a 2 or 3 week window that makes sense for your launch. Don't make it like a couple day window. That's too narrow, but give them a couple week window that makes sense for your launch. And ask them to post it live at that point. You make that happen. Of those 100 people you request, you'll get 30, 40, 50 interviews, 100%, absolutely. Now, the last key thing I want to mention here is value exchange. Listen, they're giving you tons of value for letting them you come on their show. What value are you going to give to them? Which is a huge reason to start your own podcast. Because if you have your own podcast, it doesn't have to be big, doesn't have to be amazing or awesome. You can then you can be like, listen, I have my own podcast. I'd love to bring you on for my specific niche audience so you can share your area of expertise. Let's do an exchange of value. Let's do an interview swap. We can even record it back to back. It's very efficient. It's very easy. Make that happen.
Boom. Like that was incredible. See why I love this guy? So
love it.
Sense. But gosh, that was really, really amazing. Thank you, John. And I super respect your time, of course. And I have to ask you one last question though.
Yes.
Got to do it. You have had the opportunity to have conversations with people that just seem unreachable to the average person. And I'm curious.
Talked to Tony Robbins last week. It was that guy's so much fire, by the way. Episode just dropped on Monday. Go listen to it.
How do you make a connection like that happen? I have to know. Do you have any creative hacks? Is it just a matter of reaching out? Like, what do you recommend that we do to reach out to people who otherwise seem unreachable?
You need to be strategic. You have to be strategic. And this kind of goes ahead and answers another one of the questions I don't think we were able to get to today. But if you are going to make a splash in this world and you're going to be asked to speak on stages, if you're going to ask to make an appearance here or there, wherever it might be, it's because you dominate a niche. You dominate a niche. What is your niche? And if you can't dominate the niche of podcasting because there's already people that are dominating it, what's the micro niche within podcasting that you can dominate? And again, that goes for any niche, any vertical, any industry out there. What can you become the man or woman for, so that when people think of that thing, that vertical, that industry, they think of you? And if they don't immediately think of you, it's because you haven't gone deep enough. Because you can just start up here and maybe Tony Robbins is the motivational guy. Well, who's the niche down? Who's the niche down? And then that person is going to be you. So that whenever that topic comes up, hey, we need to have a talk on Instagram stories, just Instagram stories at our next conference. You could be the Instagram story person. You can't be the Instagram person. That's covered. That's done. But maybe you've been able to niche it out because back when Instagram stories just launched, you said, I'm going all in on that. So what's the next thing that's maybe coming up in the future that you're going to become the micro niche king or queen on? What is that thing? That's so important, so huge. So that when you've done that and you've established a little bit of a name, a little bit of momentum for yourself, then what? Then you have to be strategic. I didn't get Seth Godin and Tony Robbins and Gary Vaynerchuk and Tim Ferriss on my podcast day one. I launched my podcast. I grew my audience to a reasonable size. And then I waited. I was patient. And then when Tim Ferriss launched 4-Hour Chef, when Seth Godin launched the Icarus Deception, when Tony Robbins launched Money, then I pounced because they were in promotion mode. They were out there.
Oh.
They were in promo mode, promoting their book. And that's just what they were doing. They were out there to get the word out. And I said, listen, I want you to come on, Seth, and talk about the Icarus Deception. I specifically loved chapter 4 for this reason. Can we really break this down to my audience, which are entrepreneurs? If yes, let's do this. And Seth's like, this is what I'm trying to do. Sell my book, get the word out. And this guy has an audience. He obviously knows what my book and what I'm trying to get across on this is. Let's make it happen. And I did that with every single major influence I've had. And then, by the way, Amber, and you know this, once you've done that a couple times, then it just gets so much easier. Once I interviewed Tony Robbins back in the day, when he launched his second book, his team reached out to me. And guess what I said, Amber? I said, I need a video testimonial from Tony that I can use on my website and two VIP tickets to Date with Destiny. And I got them without them even thinking about it. And then this time they reached out to me. I had some other requests that I had, and that's how it works. So now I've interviewed Tony Robbins 3 times because I've established myself, and they come to me now when they have this. Same with Gary, same with Tim, you name it, exact same thing. That's the strategy.
Wow. I literally don't even know what to say because I'm thinking about the people who are listening to this, and like, I can't even imagine what they're going to be thinking when they hear this. I mean, seriously, you dropped so much specific value, and I can't thank you enough. I've always had a big, big passion for authors, speakers, and coaches because these are the people that are trying to make the world a better place. So thank you for your time. Thank you for teaming up with me on this quick live stream to give them that specific value. Guys, there's so much more where that came from. Seriously, check out authoruplive.com. 40 days left to get your tickets if you really want to learn how to launch and have a significant success and then leverage that to scale something really impactful to help build your legacy. Guys, thanks again, John. I really appreciate it.
This girl's the real deal. Make it happen for sure.